Two superpowers. One rising. One afraid of falling. If the United States and China collide, the shockwaves will hit every corner of the globe. Former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd believes it's not too late, but the clock is ticking. This is the Avoidable War. Scene 1. A war no one wants, but everyone fears. In 2022, former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd asked one of the most urgent questions of our time. Can the United States and China avoid war? The title of his book is The Avoidable War, and it's not just about foreign policy. It's about the future of the world. If war breaks out between these two superpowers, it won't just affect Washington and Beijing. It will affect everyone, from Tokyo to New Delhi, from Manila to Nairobi. The global economy would collapse, supply chains would be severed, and millions could suffer in a conflict neither side truly wants. Rudd argues that the danger doesn't lie in either country deliberately starting a war. The danger is in miscalculation, an accident, a political crisis, or a moment of weakness that spirals out of control. Like a naval collision in the South China Sea, a standoff over Taiwan, or a cyber attack that's misunderstood and escalates too quickly. At the heart of the US-China rivalry is more than just power. It's a clash of worldviews. The United States champions liberal democracy, open markets, alliances, and global institutions. China, under Xi Jinping, promotes party-led control, national sovereignty, and a deeply centralized model of governance. This is not just a trade war. It's a contest between two systems, each trying to shape the world in its own image. Kevin Rudd calls this emerging reality managed strategic competition. A world where the US and China do not trust each other, may not cooperate, but still must avoid open conflict. The solution, he argues, is not to pretend they are friends. It's to create a clear, structured framework that reduces the risk of war. That means open communication between leaders, military-to-military hotlines, agreed rules for cyber operations and emerging technologies, and a mutual understanding of each other's red lines. Without such a framework, the US and China are headed toward a future that neither wants, but neither knows how to stop. A future where peace depends not on trust, but on luck. In the next scene, we'll explore how China sees the world, through the lens of its leader, Xi Jinping. Because to understand how to avoid war, we must first understand what China wants. Scene 2. Xi Jinping's China and the Return of History. To understand the US-China rivalry, we have to begin with one man, Xi Jinping. He is the most powerful Chinese leader since Mao Zedong. He controls the Communist Party, the military, and the state. And he has a clear vision for China's future, one shaped by history, nationalism, and ambition. Xi Jinping does not see China as rising. He sees China as returning to its rightful place as a great power in the world. For over a century, China endured what it calls the Century of Humiliation, a period of foreign invasions, colonial exploitation, and national decline. British gunboats, Japanese occupation, Western interference. To Xi Jinping, this is not ancient history. It is a living memory, and a central justification for China's current path. Under Xi Jinping, China has launched a sweeping national revival. Domestically, it means centralizing power, cracking down on dissent, and promoting party loyalty above all else. Internationally, it means reclaiming territory, reshaping global institutions, and challenging what China sees as an unfair, US-dominated world order. This is the driving logic behind policies like the Belt and Road Initiative, military expansion in the South China Sea, and China's increasing pressure on Taiwan. Xi Jinping believes that China's rise must not be stopped, and he views American efforts to contain China, through alliances, sanctions, or military deployments, as a threat to China's sovereignty and dignity. That's why even symbolic actions, like U.S. officials visiting Taiwan, trigger sharp reactions in Beijing. It's not just about geopolitics, it's about national pride and political survival. Kevin Rudd warns that the West often misunderstands this mindset. They see China as a cautious, trade-focused player. But under Xi Jinping, China is becoming more assertive, more ideological, and more ready to take risks. Xi Jinping is not afraid of confrontation, especially if it helps consolidate his rule or fulfill China's historic mission. The key to managing this rivalry, Rudd argues, is to recognize China's strategic logic, not to agree with it, but to understand it. Because if the U.S. assumes China thinks the same way the West does, it will make dangerous mistakes. In the next scene, we'll turn to the United States. What does American leadership want? And how is Washington responding to China's challenge? The answers may shape the next decade and determine whether the world moves toward peace or toward war. Scene 3. America's strategy. Fear of decline, hope for control. If China is rising with confidence, the United States is responding with something else: anxiety. Since the end of the Cold War, the U.S. has been the world's dominant power, politically, economically, and militarily. But today, that position feels less certain. America sees China not just as a competitor, but as a potential successor. A country that could reshape the global order in ways that challenge U.S. interests and values. In Washington, the fear is clear. If we lose our leadership role, we lose our security, our influence, and possibly our way of life. This fear is driving a major shift in U.S. foreign policy. For decades, American leaders hoped that integrating China into the global system would moderate its behavior. Let China join the World Trade Organization. Let it grow. Let it modernize. And eventually, it will become more open and responsible. That vision has collapsed. Under Xi Jinping, China has grown stronger, but also more authoritarian, more ambitious, and more confrontational. As a result, the United States has changed course. The new strategy is strategic competition, a broad effort to confront China on every front: trade, technology, military power, diplomacy, and global influence. The U.S. is building alliances across Asia, with Japan, South Korea, Australia, India, and others, to contain China's rise and maintain the balance of power. It is investing in advanced technologies, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, cyber warfare, to stay ahead in the digital arms race. And it is increasing its military presence in the Indo-Pacific, from the South China Sea to the Taiwan Strait. But this competition comes with risk. The more both sides prepare for conflict, the more they assume the worst about each other's intentions. Mistrust grows, communications break down, and small incidents become dangerous triggers. Kevin Rudd calls this the action-reaction trap. Each move by one side leads to a counter-move by the other, until the situation spirals out of control. The U.S. is right to take China's rise seriously, but it must also avoid turning competition into confrontation. Without restraint, even well-intentioned strategies can lead to disaster. In the next scene, we'll look at the most dangerous flashpoint in this rivalry: Taiwan. A small island, a complex history, and a single question that could decide the future of peace or war. Scene 4. Taiwan, the flashpoint no one can ignore. Among all the issues dividing the United States and China, no topic is more dangerous than Taiwan. A democratic island of 23 million people, a thriving economy, and the center of a geopolitical storm. To understand the danger, we have to start with the facts. Taiwan sees itself as a sovereign nation, with its own government, military, and elections. But China sees Taiwan as a breakaway province, one that must eventually be reunified with the mainland, by peaceful means if possible, by force if necessary. This isn't just political rhetoric. It's at the core of Chinese national identity. Under Xi Jinping, the pressure has grown. He has made reunification with Taiwan a personal and political goal, one tied to the China dream of national rejuvenation. At the same time, Taiwan's people have become more committed to their independence, rejecting Beijing's control and embracing their democratic system. Caught in the middle is the United States. The U.S. does not officially recognize Taiwan as an independent country, but it sells Taiwan weapons, supports its democracy, and has warned China that any invasion would carry severe consequences. This is called strategic ambiguity, a policy designed to deter China from attacking without officially endorsing Taiwan's independence. But strategic ambiguity is wearing thin. China sees U.S. support for Taiwan, including visits by American officials, as clear provocations, and the U.S. sees China's growing military presence near the island as signs of an impending invasion. Both sides are moving closer to confrontation. Kevin Rudd warns that Taiwan is the most likely trigger for war between the U.S. and China. Not because either side wants it, but because national pride, political pressure, and military escalation could push them into a corner. To avoid war, both sides must be clear about red lines, re-establish communication channels, and resist the urge to use Taiwan as a symbol of strength rather than a problem to manage. This is not about surrender, it's about stability, and preventing a crisis that could spiral into a global catastrophe. In the next scene, we'll explore how Kevin Rudd believes the U.S. and China can compete without colliding, and what kind of framework could keep the peace in a divided world. Scene 5. Managed strategic competition. Can rivalry be controlled? Kevin Rudd's central argument is this: war between the United States and China is not inevitable, but it will only be avoided if both sides build a new framework for managing competition. He calls this idea managed strategic competition. It means accepting that the U.S. and China are rivals, but ensuring that rivalry is predictable, stable, and contained. This is not about trust. It's about discipline. Rudd outlines a practical, structured approach, modeled after how the U.S. and Soviet Union managed their Cold War tensions without ever fighting a direct war. The key elements include high-level diplomacy, regular direct communication between top leaders, not just during crises, but as a permanent channel, military-to-military dialogue, so both sides understand each other's movements, exercises, and red lines. This reduces the risk of miscalculation during patrols or standoffs. Clear strategic doctrines, public and private explanations of each country's intentions, especially regarding Taiwan, cyber warfare, and territorial disputes. Crisis management protocols, agreed mechanisms to de-escalate when an incident occurs. This could mean third-party mediation, emergency calls, or rules of engagement. Boundaries for competition, a shared understanding of where competition is accepted, like trade, technology, and influence, and where it must be avoided, such as direct military conflict. Rudd believes both countries must treat this framework not as weakness, but as a strategic necessity. Just like during the Cold War, rules did not stop the U.S. and the Soviet Union from competing, but they did stop them from destroying each other. Of course, there are challenges. Domestic politics in both countries can make compromise difficult. Nationalism, media pressure, and political posturing can push leaders to take hardline positions. But the alternative, unmanaged competition, is far more dangerous. Managed strategic competition is not a peace treaty. It is a set of guardrails designed to keep the most important relationship in the world from driving off a cliff. In the next scene, we'll explore what this means for the rest of the world, for allies, partners, and rising powers caught between Washington and Beijing. Because avoiding war isn't just about two countries. It's about everyone else, too. Scene 6. The global ripple effect. Allies, neutrals, and the rest of us. When great powers compete, the rest of the world doesn't just watch. It reacts, adapts, and chooses sides, or tries not to. Kevin Rudd reminds us that the US-China rivalry is not happening in isolation. It's unfolding across a highly interconnected global system, where smaller nations, especially in the Indo-Pacific, are being forced to make impossible choices. For traditional American allies like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, the pressure is growing. These countries rely on the US for security, but depend heavily on China for trade. Their balancing act is delicate: support Washington too much and risk retaliation from Beijing. Get too close to China and risk losing trust with Washington. Meanwhile, rising powers like India are carving their own path. India does not want to be trapped in a new Cold War. It values strategic autonomy, and it understands that being a swing power between the US and China can be a source of leverage as well as danger. In Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, the story is similar. Many countries want to benefit from both superpowers. They seek infrastructure from China, markets from the West, and sovereignty from both. But when tensions rise over Taiwan, the South China Sea, or global technology standards, neutrality becomes harder to maintain. Rudd argues that this is where the risk becomes truly global. If the US and China slide toward confrontation, other nations may be drawn in, not because they want war, but because geography, economics, or alliance commitments force their hand. That's why managed strategic competition matters, because it gives other nations space to breathe, to make their own decisions, to avoid becoming pawns in someone else's game, and to preserve global stability in a time of tension. For the Global South, this rivalry is both a threat and an opportunity. A threat because war between the giants would hit the weakest hardest, but an opportunity because multipolar competition can increase bargaining power, economic investment, and diplomatic relevance. In the next scene, we turn to the future. What happens next? Is managed strategic competition realistic, or just wishful thinking? And what must both countries do, starting now, to avoid the unthinkable? Scene 7. The road ahead between collision and coexistence. Kevin Rudd ends the Avoidable War with a sober message. Peace is still possible, but time is running out. The US-China relationship is not beyond repair, but it is approaching a dangerous tipping point where assumptions harden, risks grow, and restraint fades. In the years ahead, both countries face a critical choice. Will they compete within limits, or will they drift into open hostility? The answer depends not just on policy, but on leadership, vision, and political will. For China, that means recognizing that excessive assertiveness, whether in the South China Sea, on Taiwan, or through coercive diplomacy, only fuels global resistance and accelerates US countermeasures. It also means accepting that international influence cannot be achieved through fear alone. It must be earned through legitimacy, transparency, and respect. For the United States, it means avoiding the temptation to confront China at every turn. Not every Chinese action is a direct threat. Not every area of competition requires escalation. America must lead with confidence, not panic, focusing on its own strengths, alliances, and values, rather than relying on containment alone. Both countries must understand that in an era of global interdependence, total victory is impossible. Economies are linked. Technologies are shared, and crises, from climate change to pandemics, do not stop at borders. The alternative to managed competition is unmanaged conflict, a future shaped by crisis, disruption, and possibly war. The choice is not between rivalry and friendship. It is between collision and coexistence. And as Rudd argues, coexistence is still within reach, but only if it is planned, disciplined, and actively maintained. This is not a call for optimism. It is a call for realism, responsibility, and urgency. Scene 8. Final Reflections. What this means for us. The Avoidable War is not just a book about strategy. It's a warning and a guide. A warning that the world's two most powerful nations are heading toward a confrontation that neither truly wants, but that could still happen through pride, fear, or miscalculation. And a guide for how that war might still be prevented, if both sides, and the world around them, act wisely and in time. But this story isn't just about presidents, generals, or diplomats. It's about all of us. Because in today's world, geopolitics affects everyone. A conflict in the Taiwan Strait could shut down global trade. A cyber attack between great powers could black out financial systems. An arms race in Asia could divert resources from poverty, education, and climate change. The ripple effects are real, and they travel far. So what can we take away from this book? First, that understanding matters. Too often, countries misunderstand each other's motives and act based on fear instead of facts. Second, that structure matters. Without rules, even powerful nations make mistakes. And without communication, small crises can become large ones. Third, that choices matter. The future is not locked in. It will be shaped by decisions made and avoided in the years ahead. For countries in the global south, in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and beyond, this is a time to think clearly, act independently, and avoid being pulled into dangerous binaries. There is space to maneuver. There is influence to be gained. But only if nations refuse to become passive bystanders. Kevin Rudd does not claim to have all the answers, but he offers a clear roadmap, a way for the US and China to manage their rivalry without turning the 21st century into another age of destruction. The war is avoidable, but that does not mean it will be avoided. It will take wisdom, it will take restraint, and it will take leadership from all sides. Because in the end, peace is not a gift, it is a responsibility. Thank you for listening to this audiobook summary from PastCast. If you found it valuable, please consider subscribing to the channel for more thoughtful reviews and historical insights. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.